Kept you waiting, huh? This is my long overdue 500 subscriber special, but it might as well be a 750 or 800 subscriber special, now that the channel has grown so quickly in the past few months. Thanks to each and every one of you who has joined the ride, and even more thanks to those who have stuck with this channel for so long. This is by far the biggest video I have ever worked on, so after 9 months in development, hopefully it'll have been worth the wait. Now, a lot has changed since I made the first part of my Yakuza villains rankings, and most of that has to do with literally one game, Lost Judgment. RGG Studios really knocked this one out of the park when it comes to writing memorable characters and villains. Before we dive into the top 10, I would like to present a revised rankings from numbers 15 to 11 after giving some things more thought, and also having played other games in this franchise. I have switched up some characters, moved those more deserving of being ranked up. As the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and nobody embodies that better than him. A unique entry, as he's definitely not a guy you think would be capable of evil at first glance, until you see how his obsession corrupts him. Human experimentation, blackmail, arson, murdering an innocent woman and letting an innocent man take the fall for it through the death penalty. Easily the most hateable, punchable, cowardly piece of shit in the series. Fuck this guy. RGG Studios wanted him to be the most hateable scumbag in the game, and they did it well. An absolutely callous, pathetic, cowardly excuse of a Yakuza, let alone a man. He commits all these horrible crimes in Yakuza 6, willing to endanger many innocents, all because of some deep-seated daddy issues. Talk about a fucking man-child. Throughout the game, you just want to punch him, but then the more you progress through the Yakuza 6 story, you just want the fucker to burn. I, and I'm pretty sure many others out there, wouldn't have minded if Kurhyou just straight up offed the guy. That's all I have to say about it. Fuck you, Wami. I already know I'm gonna get some angry comments from this, but hear me out. Ryuji is fresh and unconventional take on a villain. Absolutely just balls to the wall and straightforward, with a lot of presence. The guy's design just screams freaking badass. He's a cool villain with great boss fights for sure, but plot-wise his simple-mindedness might just be his own undoing, because in the plot he takes nothing but L's, except for when he beat up Daigo and when he took over his clan. His motivations are pretty stupid though. He's doing all this because he doesn't like sharing the name of Dragon.
That's really dumb. But he's so cool! But that's so dumb!
As a character, I'd rank him way up there, but as a villain, sorry, but no.
Time to accept it. Among the men in this room, you represent the weak. That goes for all of them.
This guy was even closer to making the top 10. I was almost going to put this guy over the main villain, his own son. He made such a strong impression in what little screen time he had, and his character takes so many turns. We know he's been tormenting Ichiban ever since he was young, but then we get to see another more gruesome and unhinged side of him when Arakawa dies. Then we find out he's a freaking badass Kingsman-looking motherfucker who can use anything as a weapon. And then everything after the boss fight. This guy had such a deep lore, and after how everything plays out in the end, you can't help but feel really sorry for the guy. Truly a tragic villain. Masato Arakawa is an amalgamation of all the popular Yakuza villains. Like Nishiki, he was a close friend turned enemy. Like Jingu, he's a corrupt politician pulling the strings behind everything. Like Mine, he was a self-made man with a good reputation masking his criminality. He's also the solution to all the problems most other Yakuza villains tend to have. Nishiki's lack of screen time, the overused silent mastermind cliché, Jingu's lack of personality and depth, and he's quite literally the opposite of Aizawa, who was a lame villain with a nonsensical plot twist, but had an amazing boss fight. As a villain and character aside from all that, he's got a lot going on. We learn how hard he's had it throughout the game, and how his fragile mentality resulting from such could not handle one really bad day. A bad day that basically was the start of his own darkness and Ichiban's misery, something he causes. Despite all this, as much as I want to rank him higher due to how they handle his character, crazy enough, I think the villains higher up in the ranking overshadow him in different ways. First off, one could argue all this started because he simped for a woman. I mean, let's be real here. I understand there's more to it, but still, he did all this despite the guy who stole his girl. Second of all, the boss fight was pretty mediocre compared to those of the other villains in this list. I understand why, as it was intentional given the context of the game and how he's frail and all, but still, I feel like they could have done more in a different sense, like have more QTEs, maybe better ones, or change it up just a little more. I don't know, have do normal fighting. Maybe they could like edit some flashbacks in or something like they did with Kiwami. I don't know, it just felt short and lacking an emotional impact. Third, his bond with Ichiban just didn't feel as close as that of another Yakuza villain and another Yakuza protagonist. The Judgment series has some very well-written villains, and Hamura is a prime example of that. The first time you meet him, he's nothing but a condescending and antagonistic jerk towards Yagami. You can already tell he's going to be a piece of work, and it's not long before you find out, indeed he is. Ruthless, sadistic, in cahoots with the bigger, badder guys, and constantly forcing others to do his dirty work. But underneath it all, just a dirty, slimy coward. What makes him stand out, however, is that despite all that, he's ultimately doing all of this out of loyalty to the family. He's doing what he feels is necessary for the clan to survive. And the worst part is, he's kind of got a point. Matsugane was way too soft, and Kaido is way too reckless and not exactly the best at making decisions. There are no other capable leaders. What makes him even more interesting is that he was genuinely remorseful when his actions eventually led to the death of his patriarch, a man who he did look up to in a way. This led him to reconsider who he's fighting for, and ultimately he makes amends by turning himself in and becoming Yagami's trump card and incriminating Ichinose. A very fascinating villain and character with the best redemption arc since Hamazaki from Yakuza's 3 and 4. Also, his boss fight and theme music are pretty cool. Shibusawa. For many of the newer Yakuza fans who started with zero, myself included, Shibusawa set the bar. He was a great villain to start the series with. Badass, calculating, ruthless, and goes from having little presence to a lot of presence in the story very naturally and smoothly, unlike Aizawa from Yakuza 5. His boss fight really feels like a boss fight, as he knows everything Kurhyou knows, really putting Kuryou's skills to the test. A difficult boss for sure, with an awesome boss fight theme and just the best choreography ever. The transitions between stances and how the music changes with it, and the QTEs that accompany each transition are nothing short of phenomenal. Even though he surpasses all of the Yakuza 0 villains in this list in terms of status, except Ojima. Unfortunately for him, I don't quite rank him the best villain in the game. One other Yakuza in 0 surpasses him, in my opinion, but we'll get to that later. Another fresh and unconventional take on the Yakuza villain. A blind healing doctor who seems to also be a fortune teller, as he manages to correctly predict the fate of Tatsuya and his friends, and also he manages to correctly predict where the ball in the roulette will land, twice! But as it is revealed later on, he's actually a puppet master, pulling so many strings behind the plot. They still don't explain how he got the roulette shit though, but anyways. This man is omnipresent in the game, yet radiates so much mystery and intrigue. A charismatic enigma. As the story unfolds, you see more of his sinister intentions. but towards the end you start to understand where he's coming from and why he is the way that he is. He's essentially a broken man, willing to do whatever it takes to enact revenge on those who wronged him. The only thing holding this guy back is the plot he was in. The plot of the game itself was too slow of a burn, and I personally felt it dragged on way too long, but that's not too relevant to the criteria, and besides, he definitely carries it with just how powerful and fearsome he came across in the game. Imagine having a guy who can predict the worst outcomes, and then making it look like it'll all inevitably come true, and also to be in control of a powerful criminal organization sweeping almost more than one big city. That, coupled with the whole roulette thing again. Thankfully, our boy Tatsuya is way too unrelenting and doesn't believe in such fatalistic bullshit, and he manages to turn things around. Still, I feel like Ryo Nozaki is quite similar to Ryo Aoki and maybe even Meaning. Both started off powerless with society just throwing them away, but managed to rise to the top really quickly out of spite. I think Nozaki has much better motivations and personality than Aoki though, simply because you can feel the unfairness he felt in his life, having been born poor in an orphanage and being cheated by the rich, losing a loved one in the process. Also, his boss fight is way cooler and more dynamic with the freaking power-ups and shockwaves, even if it was slightly more on the easier side of things.
First comes pain, and then the fear. You have to start with pain. Fear won't work if you haven't given them reason. Slap them around, but you do need to keep them conscious. Enough to keep the fear alive. Am I right?
This guy embodies cold-bloodedness, calm and calculating with a sense of suaveness and debonair, even when he's sadistically enjoying torturing and killing a bunch of people under his own delusion that he's doing the right thing, that the ends justify the means. Just as the name of his fitting theme song suggests, he is very much like a viper, just lying in the grass, waiting to strike at his next prey. I guess you can say he's a cold-hearted snake.
He's a cold-hearted snake. Look into his eyes.
But yeah, Soma's a very dangerous dude, building a criminal empire from the underground with all the powers backing him, and he has more than enough strength to hold his own, besting Yagami with relative ease in the first fight. He's the last guy you would want holding a knife besides the spy. Oh, speaking of other guys you wouldn't want holding a knife, this guy. You know how I said Masato Arakawa was an amalgamation of previous Yakuza villains? Well, this guy takes it to a whole new level, with a whole new layer of fucking twisted. Now, I'm no psychologist, but I've studied enough about psychopathy during my college years to know that this guy is absolutely a psychopath. Let's go over the requirements that make a psychopath using the Robert Hare psychopathy checklist, shall we? Glibness or superficial charm?
Clearly, the man has a way with people. Call it an uncanny knack for charm. His college circles treat him like a guru. They say he's a living legend. Even his company seems to be under his spell.
Grandiose sense of self-worth. Has no qualms with sacrificing others to get his way, even burning an entire innocent family to death. Also, he will kill anyone just to preserve his image. Need for stimulation. He gets his kicks in many ways, that's for sure. Whether it's alcohol, money, knives, business deals, etc. Pathological lying. Pretty much everything he tells and has told Mikiko up until that point was a lie. Conning and manipulative. That's literally how he became so successful and how he scored with Mikiko. Also his relationship with Kenmochi. Lack of remorse or guilt. This guy literally commits mass murder and fucking celebrates like he won the lottery. Shallow effect. He pretends to feel sad about his son only to be easily sidetracked by a business call right after. Callous or lack of empathy. Aside from all the gleeful murdering and sacrificing, he fucking slices his own son's hand with a knife just to prove a point. Parasitic lifestyle. He married Mikiko just to kill her family and get their money! Poor behavioral controls. Again, with his own son we see this. Abusive father, to say the least. Promiscuous sexual behavior, we can't really determine that for sure, so that's a pass. Early behavior problems, we don't know anything about that either, pass. Lack of realistic goals, sort of. He was delusional for sure, but his goals were pretty straightforward for the most part, up until the end. So he gets 1 point for that. Impulsivity. Money and having a clean image makes him do some pretty crazy things. Irresponsibility. Hey, world's greatest dad, am I right? Failure to accept responsibility. Parenting issues aside, he works around this kind. It's literally why he gets others like Kenmochi to do his dirty work. It ultimately becomes his own undoing. We're gonna pass on these few just because, yeah, we don't know that much about him. Criminal versatility. He started doing shady shit since he was in college. He's no stranger to crime. So as you can see, score checks out. Basically, he should burn it now. And I sure as hell am glad that Kenmochi sent him there. Remember how I said earlier that I don't consider Shibusawa to be the best villain in Yakuza 0? In my eyes, there's only one other villain that surpasses him. Fiction is full of stories of hopeless people who set goals where it seems pointless to even try to achieve. Yet they work their asses off constantly, always getting up for more, no matter how many times life knocks them down. We all love a good underdog story. But what if that underdog story gets flipped? Instead of rooting for the underdog, the circumstances, in this case the underdog not being a hero but rather a villain out to make the hero's life a living hell, make it so that we have no choice but to root against him. And as the story goes on, we're still wanting the underdog to lose. But just like any underdog, we start respecting him. And then we remember their name. He may not be a winner. Hell, he suffers so many losses in this story. But whether it's win or lose, he never backs down from a fight. And that man is none other than Kuze. Oh yeah, this is a man who leaves a lasting impression. This is a man who you can't forget no matter how much you want to. I mean seriously, how many times do we have to teach him this lesson? You'd think 5 would be enough. Anyways, badass bad guy, badass design, badass freaking tattoo, badass theme songs, and badass boss battles. He is the reason the game, if not the entire series, starts off so strong. And he's the glue of Kuryou's story in Yakuza 0, as he constantly torments him, and is literally always there when things go south for him, if not causing it himself. But he is as real can be, and throughout the encounters with Kuze, as he's trying to teach Kurhyou a lesson, he eventually learns a little something from him himself, and comes to change a bit. You're never too old to learn. Kurhyou is definitely the first and best of his kind when it comes to villains in this series. Who would have thought this stuck-up asshole of a cop, who was constantly antagonizing Yagami any chance he got because he was just that petty, would actually be this fucking scary? The man behind all the gruesome murders. And with all the powers backing him in a position of power himself, things do not look good at all for our heroes. Easily the most lethal and scary villain in the series. Whereas other villains want to kick your ass and maybe kill you, this guy will not just kill you, but literally anyone else on sight. Extremely cold, callous, and when he hits his breaking point, delusional. An absolute sociopath. It's like if the T-1000 met Wesker. That's what this guy's like. His boss fight is a fight for your life as he rivals and matches Yagami in skill, even copying a few of his tricks. And just when you think he's been beat, he gets a fucking full health heal? What the fuck? Kurhyou is definitely a simple yet very effective villain and an absolute monster of a final boss. and he is one of the reasons why Judgment is so freaking good.
Kurhyou さん、これがあなたの最後の戦いです。思いっきり来てください。
言われなくても遠慮はしねえ。とことんやってやるぜ。行くぞ。
One could argue he is also the first of his kind when it comes to Yakuza villains. For many an OG Yakuza fan, he probably set the example, and it shows. The respectable, stoic, self-made man who makes a big power play in the second half of the story. He also is the first final boss to have an epic cutscene and dynamic intro preceding the fight. For many a newer fan, Shibusawa may have set the bar for Yakuza villains, but Mine definitely surpasses it. He plays a bigger role in the game's story and is overall a huge threat to Kurhyou, as he was responsible for the destruction of his orphanage, and pretty close to taking over the Tojo clan, and is most likely the strongest Yakuza villain in terms of strength. This guy put up the best fight with Kurhyou even when Kurhyou was at his best condition. And that's saying something. The guy also trains in MMA, so that's pretty cool. Mine is a cool mix of cold, intelligent, yet raw and badass, with a layer of depth to his character. This man carries the plot of Yakuza 3, especially later on in the game. He gives off all kinds of impressions throughout the game though. First he seemed cool, then he seemed even cooler when he killed Kanda, and then suddenly not so cool. Not cool at all. Then it's what the fuck territory. Then you understand his motivations. Having grown up as an orphan like Kurhyou, who's lost his only family at an early age, and on top of that dealing with loneliness all his life. That's not easy, and a lot of us can relate to the loneliness part. That being said, you still want to beat the shit out of him. Eventually, you get what you want, and it leads to a bittersweet reconciliation, which unfortunately doesn't last long. He has the makings of a peak Yakuza villain. He's got a great design, he's got great presence, personality. Every scene he's in, you feel it. The guy is just in control. Also, in the other sense of the word, since the man had a lot of money, strength, and power, and the brains to utilize it all properly, he was memorable. His character had a surprising amount of depth, such as being cut from the same cloth as Kurhyou but raised differently. And not to mention his awesome boss music, probably my favorite track in the whole series, and boss fight, which stands out so much given how much shit this game gets for its combat. He's the perfect villain. He could be number one, but sometimes it's not the perfection that matters. Sometimes it's the imperfections, and these next two entries know a little thing or two about imperfection. This was a really tough call to make. But yes, number 2, not number 1, is Nishiki. Somehow it feels both appropriate and inappropriate to have him as number 2, but in all honesty, it could have gone either way. Now, where do I even begin? His descent into villainy is nothing short of heartbreaking. Enter Yakuza 0. Nishiki's our best pal, the ride or die homie, a true brother who stuck with Kurhyou through thick and thin, no matter how tough things got. We see how much he really looks out for him, such as in that super emotional scene in the woods, his team up with Kurhyou in the final arc, and him preventing Kurhyou from killing a man since he doesn't want Kurhyou going down a dark path. Then came Kiwami. Despite my issues with Kiwami, namely that it felt like a Yakuza 0 DLC extension and it didn't change things up too much in terms of plot, it at least did Nishiki's villain arc justice. The original PS2 Nishiki was just too shallow for my taste, a bit too corny, and was memorable, but in all the wrong ways.
10 years in the joint made you a fucking pussy.
But through the course of 2 games, they really gave him a lot of depth, and Nishiki essentially became the glue that held Kiwami's mess of a plot together. His transformation into a villain is sad but understandable. You see everything he goes through since that fateful day. I mean, just imagine being kicked around, failing, falling, losing everything. All the while, everyone is constantly making comparisons with you, telling you how incompetent and inadequate you are, telling you that your brother could have done it better. That will break almost anyone. It's unfortunate that Kiryu's name gets constantly echoed during the worst times of his life, and it hurts even more with the context of Yakuza 0. Such tragedy can change a bond that was so close you can feel it, to an animosity so strong it sets a chain of events that either ruined or ended multiple lives. Nishiki's story really plays with the idea of fate and destiny. It makes one wonder how differently things would have played out if, say, Kurhyou did not take the fall, or if Nishiki just communicated with Kurhyou while he was in prison somehow. Nishiki is one of the best examples in gaming of a fallen hero, and it's this that helps set him apart from all the other villains. He goes above and beyond the criteria of what makes the best Yakuza villains, with a layer of tragedy and a stronger connection with the character, with a twisted Cinderella story that could have almost ended in success for him, with an influence spanning multiple games. I mean, he inadvertently torments Kurhyou from beyond the grave, just through the impact he and his actions had on him and his family's misdeeds. This is why I believe he is undoubtedly high up there, at the top in the villain's rankings. Nishiki essentially shaped Kiryu's path for the rest of the series, and in that sense he finally became the dragon that he was destined to be. My number 1 and 2 picks were not an easy decision. It was a test of my, dare I say, judgment. Do I choose the most iconic and well-known villain in the series, with a tragic tale and an influence spanning multiple games? Or do I choose a much less known villain in this series, with bar none the most depth and development in his series throughout the course of only one game? This villain stands way above the rest, because not only do you understand his motivations, you also find yourself agreeing with them. In fact, you feel so conflicted fighting him because his intentions resonate with you that much, making you question whether or not you're doing the right thing. A true anti-villain. When it comes down to it, he's just a broken man trying to take matters into his own hands and enforce justice, where the law fails to do so otherwise. Jin Kuwana. Kuwana was not always a bully-hunting, serial-killing vigilante handyman. He was simply a teacher that thought he got along pretty well with the kids. Ignorant of the severity of the blatant bullying by the majority of the class of one of his students, Mitsuru, he dismissed it with a smirk on his face, telling the bullies not to overdo it. By the time he realized the error of his ways, thanks to literally the only classmate who cared about Mitsuru, what the fuck is wrong with these children? He decided to take action by recording evidence, but it was already too late. Nothing short of tragic. Kuwana knew that the justice system would give the bullies tormenting Mitsuru practically a slap on the wrist. After all, they were just kids. This, along with the extremely heavy weight of his guilt, led him to hunt down all the unrepentant bullies in Japan that caused their victims to attempt suicide. This was his way of atonement. This is what leads him to orchestrate most of the events in Lost Judgment. So much depth with layers of tragedy to this character, and it doesn't even end there. The guy's very crafty and resourceful, with all the street smarts in the world, and his Yagami's equal when it comes to fighting. Also, his boss fight music is one of my personal favorites. The first one was very dark and ominous, but intense. Towards the end, it has the intensity, but a different kind. A more dramatic and emotional intensity. One thing that makes this villain so brilliantly written is that he's essentially the exemplar of the characterization that most villains in this list, if not the series, tends to get. The reflection. Nishiki mirrored the protagonist's power and destiny. Ryuji, despite mirroring the dragon tattoo, was the complete opposite of the protagonist personality-wise. Mine, despite mirroring the main character's upbringing, had the opposite world view of the protagonist. Iwami and Someya reflected different ideals of the Yakuza. Iwami being a bastardization of the modern Yakuza, Someya being the embodiment of the future, and Kurhyou a relic of the past. Kawana and Yagami share a similar dark past, but both have opposite moral beliefs and opposite views of justice. Just two broken men with a lot of street cred trying to do right their own ways. Yagami doing it the more clean way, and Kawana getting his hands dirty whenever necessary. What really sticks out to me about Kawana is that, yeah, one can argue he's doing the right thing. I mean, everyone he's killed or forced to do his dirty work is a piece of shit. At the end, he was close to getting what he wanted to. All the bad guys facing justice, and for Kusumoto to reunite with her son Mitsuru after he was in a coma for so long. Even then, he still technically won, for the most part. His crimes were so well thought out that they can't link him to the murders. He can go in hiding and theoretically keep doing his thing while the real bad guys end up being held accountable one way or another. And he makes a mockery of Japan's justice system in the process. One can argue the real world could use someone like Kawana. There are way too many bullies out there walking scot-free after seriously ruining lives, if not taking them away. Some very extreme real-world examples come to mind. I gotta also say, Lost Judgment made me realize that when it comes to depth of character, most of the other villains in this franchise pale in comparison. This is probably because from Zero onwards, the series' storytelling started coming into its own. And as far as villains go, Kawana set the bar really freaking high. Lost Judgment is peak RGG Studios writing, and I look forward to see what this studios has got to offer going forward. Thank you so much for sticking with me throughout the months, and there's gonna be plenty more to come. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I would appreciate if you left a like, comment, and subscribe. It would help me a ton. And spread it around too, maybe start some discussion. Anyways, that's it from me today. I'll be seeing you. Bye bye.